Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I am back today with another story for you. So if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. Today we are going to cover something that I covered in the very, very early stages of my channel, so most of you probably haven't seen it. This story is a little more popular in the treasure hunting circle. A lot of people have probably heard about it. Maybe they don't remember a lot of the details, but if you're pretty heavily into that community, you may know a little bit about it already. And today we are going to talk about the Lost Adams diggings in the Arizona-New Mexico border area. I will give a shout out in this video to Lacey and David, since we were talking about some of these topics of some of these stories around the New Mexico lava fields in western central New Mexico, and we're discussing some of this stuff, and this story came up, and I remembered I'd done this one super early before most people probably had seen it. So anyhow, and I have a few more details, and I'm probably better at telling the stories at this point than I was in the very early stages of my channel. So we'll go through things and give a little bit better description of everything this time. And if you have any thoughts, of course, you can leave them in the comments. The story starts out with Adams, and we don't know Adams' first name, but he was said to have been born around July 10th of 1829 in Rochester, New York. He moved out west to Los Angeles, and he started a freighting business in 1861. Like I said, we're not sure exactly what his first name was. He went by Adams, and it seems that all accounts only refer to him as Adams. So his first name really isn't super important to the story, but Adams' freighting business was mainly for freighting goods between Los Angeles, California, and Tucson, Arizona. I guess at this point there were more people moving into the Arizona territory, and Adams took advantage of this. And it was a very lucrative job, and business was growing as more and more people began coming to the desolate, wild areas of Arizona to look for their fortunes after, striking out in California in the gold fields there, or maybe they were, coming to Arizona for other reasons. But regardless of the reasons, people were coming to Arizona now in greater numbers than prior years, and there was more of a demand to ship their goods or freight their goods with them. A lot of bigger stuff that required Adams' teams of wagons and horses. So on one of these trips, Adams had just dropped off some freight in Tucson, and he was just starting on his way back towards California when he stopped to camp for the evening. And it appears he was not too far outside of the Tucson area when he stopped for the night. At this point, the Apaches had managed to sneak into his camp, and they took off with some of his horses. But Adams was able to hop onto one of his remaining horses fairly quickly, and he gave chase. He managed to get his stolen horses back fairly easily, and this did not sit well with him. He knew that the Apaches did not give up easily, and he felt something was not right. Something felt very off to him. So as he made his way back to camp with his recovered horses, he found out why he was able to get his horses back so easily. The Apaches were just trying to lure him away so they could burn his camp down. The Apaches had set fire to his wagon, his money, his supplies, and everything else that they could find to set on fire. All he had left were his remaining 12 horses. At this point, he decided to head towards the Pima village fairly close by, and Pima were the Native Americans that also were in the area. The Apaches were in the area. The Apaches were a lot more hostile, and the Pima tribe was a lot more friendly. And apparently he was fairly close to the Pima villages at this point, so he headed off that direction. And anyhow, the Pima, being much nicer and not hostile to the white man, he felt this was the safest place for him to go, or the closest place for him to go and figure out what he was going to do. So his plan was to try to trade a couple of his horses for supplies that he would need to get back to Los Angeles. So when he arrived at the villages, he found a mix of prospectors and Native Americans, and he befriended a few prospectors and discussed his situation with them. Adams also met another man while here. This man was called Gotch Ear, which was a term referring to his misshapen ear. So Gotch Ear was a native Mexican. His brother and himself had been kidnapped by the Apaches when they were young, and they were raised as Apaches. And the Apaches came to trust them through the years, and the Apaches had shown them both the location of a canyon filled with gold and gold nuggets. And a few years later, Gotch Ear's brother had gotten into a fight with another Apache, and Gotch Ear's brother was killed. Gotch Ear was very upset about this loss of his brother, and he avenged the death and killed that particular Apache that had killed his brother. So now Gotch Ear was on the run from the Apaches. He knew they would likely kill him if they caught him. This appears to be why he was hiding out in the Pima villages, as the Apache and the Pima were generally not on good terms with each other. He also likely knew he could not hide out there for very long and would need to move on soon. So Gotch Ear made a deal with Adams. Gotch Ear wanted to make his escape back to Mexico, but he did not have the needed horses or goods for the journey. He told Adams he would show him the location of the canyon full of gold if Adams would provide him with 2 horses, a gun, some ammunition, and a bit of money to make his escape. Adams discussed this with the other prospectors that were involved in this conversation, and they all agreed that if Adams would provide Gotch Ear with the 2 horses, they would provide the other needed goods, and they would all accompany Gotch Ear on this amazing opportunity. So depending on the source, the group of men consisted of either 12 or 22 men that went on this journey to find this canyon of gold. Gotch Ear let them all know that it would take many days to get there. All the men were fine with that, as they could not wait for the prospect of this gold-laden canyon. The date that they left was said to be August 20th of 1864. From the Pima village northwest of Tucson, they headed north to the Gila River. They followed the Gila River east to its confluence with the San Carlos River. From here, they headed up north on the San Carlos River until it turns east. From where the river turns east, it was said that they continued north and they left the river behind them. As they continued north, they were in a heavily timbered mountain area. They continued in this direction for 4 days and came to a very tall peak. It is thought to possibly be Baldy Peak or Mount Baldy near present-day Greer, Arizona. During this 4-day part of the trek, Adams said they had crossed 2 large streams since leaving the Gila River. From here, they had followed one of the streams or rivers to its east fork into the White Mountains for 2 days, which put them near this towering peak, likely Mount Baldy. This is where the headwaters of this stream were said to be. From a high vantage point in these mountains, they could see many mountain ranges. Gotch Ear pointed to 2 closely nestled mountain peaks in the far distance and said that the canyon is close to those peaks. Adams thought those peaks looked to be around 100 miles away in a northeasterly direction. From there, Gautier took them to an old Native American trail that headed to the northeast. They eventually got to a wagon trail. Gautier said to remember it as it leads to the old fort near the Malpais Rocks. It is believed that the fort was likely Fort Wingate near present-day Grants, New Mexico. It was not stated which direction the fort was when they passed the wagon trail. They eventually got to a box canyon on a high mesa, and they camped there for the night. This mesa and box canyon had an old abandoned irrigation ditches and many vines all over it. Adams named this place Pumpkin Patch. The next morning, they continued up the canyon until about midday. They reached a reddish-colored solid rock wall about 60 to 70 feet tall. At the base of the wall was a giant boulder. It appeared to be a dead end, and the men were ready to turn around. Gautier did not let them turn around, and he pointed out that behind this big boulder was an almost unnoticeable hidden portal behind it. This opening led to another rough trail and to a tight zigzag canyon that did a perfect Z. In this canyon, in places, the walls were so close that the men could reach out and touch both walls at the same time with both of their hands. The canyon finally opened up, and there were large boulders and timber. They continued to follow a little stream to the other end of the canyon, and then they climbed up a steep trail onto a mesa. From there, Gautier pointed out to the two mountain peaks that they had seen a few days earlier while in the White Mountains. It appeared that they were just a few hours away now. Next, they were led down into a canyon with a stream on the canyon floor. Here they camped for the night. The next morning, the men started panning for gold in the little stream and started turning up a lot of gold nuggets. They were so excited, but Gautier said this was not the place that he was taking them. Gautier said that there was even more gold a little ways up. But the men did not want to leave, and they said they would stay here, and they paid Gautier. Gautier told them that the men should not stay long at this location, as it was a campsite of the Apaches, and it would not be safe for very long. After the warning, Gautier left. At this point, the men panned for gold and cut timber to make a cabin, and later details from the Apaches said that Gautier was killed by the Apaches not long after he left this canyon. This is likely true, as Apache Chief Nana and 20 of his warriors showed up very quickly in the canyon when the white men were there panning. The Apaches thought that the gold was the tears from the sun and that it was sacred. Luckily for the prospectors, Chief Nana allowed them to keep panning if they stayed in the canyon and they did not venture above onto the rim. He said any miner found on the rim would be killed. One morning, a horse made its way onto the rim above, and a miner went to retrieve it. While on the rim, he discovered a gold nugget the size of an egg. The gold nugget was hidden under a tree stump, and Adams tried to keep everyone in the valley and not venturing up onto the mesa. But the miners started to head up onto the rim to look for themselves, and, they would find more gold up there. So far, the gold that they had amassed down in the valley was being put in a coffee can under a flagstone by the fireplace in the little cabin they had built. It was said that they had amassed around 300 pounds of gold at this point. But at this point, the men were running out of food and supplies. They had been there for a while, and they were going to need to make a supply run. So Adams sent John Brewer and some more of the men to find the fort that Gautier had pointed out, and they were to head there for more supplies. And of course, they would have plenty of gold to trade for supplies or to purchase supplies with. Adams figured it was probably around an 8-day round trip. So once 8 days had passed and the men were not back yet, Adams and another man named Jack Davidson rode back through the rough canyon. As they reached the secret entrance to the canyon, they found the dead men with flour and other supplies scattered about. So it appears they were returning from the supply run and they were almost back. And they had been apparently attacked by the Apaches and killed. Adams and Davidson buried the men in a crevice and covered them with rocks. At this point, they started to head back to camp to tell the others what had happened and what they had found. As they were about a mile away, they heard gunfire. They knew this was bad news, and they knew that they could not go back to camp now. They carefully climbed onto the rim and got a spot where they had a vantage point down to their campsite. There they saw all of their friends dead on the canyon floor. So they decided to unsaddle their horses, and they sent their horses. This is Adams and Jack Davidson. They sent their horses running away, and they hid in the bushes until the sun went down. Once the sun was down, they snuck into camp to retrieve whatever gold they could. They discovered that the cabin that they had built was still burning, and it had collapsed over top of their gold cache, and they would not be able to retrieve the gold that they had amassed. The only gold that they could retrieve was the egg-sized nugget that they buried underneath a tree stump. So they grabbed it and they got the heck out of camp as dawn was fast approaching. They wandered in the desert for 13 days before they finally made it to the fort, sunburned, thirsty, and barely alive. Their clothes were now rags barely hanging on their bodies, and the men were completely exhausted. Soon after arriving, Davidson died. Adams told the doctor at the fort about their adventures and showed him the egg-sized nugget. A couple of days later, while Adams was still recovering but delirious, some peaceful Apaches came to the fort. But Adams recognized them as some of Chief Nana's men. Adams grabbed a rifle and he shot 2 of them. So Adams was in serious trouble, and he escaped instead of waiting for his murder trial. At this point, Adams disappeared, never to be heard from again. Now, if he ran into any Apaches during his escape, it is likely that he did not live to tell anyone else any other details about this canyon of gold, except for the doctor at the fort. So obviously the doctor probably knew a few details. We don't know exactly how much, the doctor knew, but a lot of these details, I believe, came from the doctor who had looked for it and never found it. So people have looked for this zigzag canyon and this canyon of gold and everything for many years, and no one had any luck. Now, there has been, in more recent years, someone that claims they may have found it, and I don't know for sure if this person actually found it or what their exact situation is. So it's possible someone has found it. It's possible that it isn't this location and that this is still out there somewhere ready to be found. It very well could be in the west central area of New Mexico. It could be on Native American reservation. It could be in the lava fields, national monument area. It's very likely that it could be in an area that is not able to be prospected or mined or retrieved or anything like that, depending on the situation where, with the land and where it may possibly be located. But it appears to be somewhere in the Arizona, New Mexico border area, maybe likely more on the New Mexico side. But that is the story of the Lost Adams diggings. And if you have any thoughts or comments or anything, you can leave them in the comments section. Please keep your comments friendly, and I guess we will be with you with more stories in the near future here. Let us know if you have any thoughts. Thank you.